After the United States launched a surprise military strike on Venezuela and captured Nicolás Maduro, the reaction has been rather interesting. Venezuelans, many who had sought refuge outside the country, dancing and celebrating, while a certain group online, the people who never miss a chance to yell about American imperialism, suddenly discovered a deep and abiding concern for the sovereignty of a narco-dictatorship, and that's where things get revealing. These voices will tell you with absolute moral certainty that the West is the source of all oppression on earth, but they seem to have an uncanny habit of landing on the side of actual oppressors whenever the oppressor happens to be anti-Western.
Trump said the United States will be running Venezuela! Woo! A colony! Woo! Imperialism! All for what? So a fucking multinational corporation can get profit! Woo!
And at the same time, in Iran, millions of ordinary people have been risking their lives protesting a brutally violent Islamist regime, and those same voices are either silent, dismissive, or suddenly very uninterested. For the past 2 years, leftists and their allies and Islamists have tried convincing the entire world that they truly are the voice of morality and reason, that they stand against oppression everywhere in the world. But when it comes to actually putting words into action, this hasn't really been the case. They proudly complain about Israel, often violently in the streets of London, Berlin, and Sydney. They have coerced politicians and held the entire Western Hemisphere's political landscape laser-focused on the Gaza war. Right now, Iran is going through one of the worst economic and political crises it's faced in decades, and it's not abstract or theoretical. It's showing up very concretely in people's daily lives. Prices keep rising, the currency keeps losing value, and for a lot of ordinary families, it's become genuinely difficult to afford things that used to be basic and taken for granted, like food, rent, and transport. Years of corruption, bad economic management, and a political system that prioritizes ideology and power over competence have slowly hollowed things out, and eventually that pressure has to go somewhere, so it goes into the streets. And that's what we are seeing today across Iran. Not a single protest here or there, but waves of demonstrations spreading through cities and towns involving students, workers, shopkeepers, and people who, until fairly recently, mostly kept their heads down and tried to get on with their lives. That's also why the response from the authorities have been so heavy-handed. There have been violent crackdowns, and in some cases people have been killed simply for protesting. As is often the case in Iran, these aren't symbolic acts and they are not safe acts. People are taking real risks because for them, the status quo has already become intolerable. This is why it's so weird seeing Western leftists suddenly fall silent. They've marched and claimed for years that they are the moral arbiters of international politics, but not in this case. Side note, if you're enjoying this video and you want to support the work and the mission behind it, consider helping me take this full time by joining Patreon. It keeps the channel alive, it lets me do more of this, and it comes with a bunch of extras for supporters. Iran's authoritarian government jails dissidents, polices women's bodies, criminalizes homosexuality, and violently suppresses its own population. None of that seems to trigger anywhere near the same moral urgency as a Western government does when it missteps. And the reason is also not subtle. As they say, no Jews, no news. Iran positions itself against the United States and against Israel, and for those leftists, that single fact seems to override everything else about what the regime actually does to its own citizens. In the case of Venezuela, it's perhaps even more bizarre. With Iran, these people are silent, but now it appears they are vocally for one of the most violent authoritarian narco regimes on the planet.
Nicolás Maduro.
What do you know about Nicolás Maduro?
I don't know much, bro, but I'm here with Central CSO, and we fight against all this with like the Trump administration, ICE, police brutality. So we're just here in support of all that right now.
And what does Maduro have to do with all that?
Take this tweet, for example, of the doctor from the UK's NHS who's a certified Jew hater. Free Maduro, she says, while comfortably living not in the Middle East or anywhere near Venezuela, but a flat likely in London. Venezuelans, millions of whom are living in exile, are celebrating in the streets. Listen to this young man's message to Western leftists.
Venezuela, I'm Venezuelan. People are criticizing Trump for what he did in Venezuela. They say he bombed and kidnapped our president. No. Let me be clear. That man was never our president. He's a dictator. We didn't vote for him. Our elections were stolen, and when we protested, our kids were sent to prison. Minors were tortured, girls were forced to prostitute themselves in prisons just to get food, to get a piece of bread. And where were all of you then? Where were all of you, liberals? Where were all of you? Where were all of you? You said nothing. You did nothing. But now you suddenly care about international law?
And yet, this doesn't stop literal communists from marching in places like the USA, like in this video. And let's not forget this really funny tweet from New York's brand new Muslim mayor, Zohran Mamdani. I doubt anybody really briefed him, apart from him actually seeing it on X like the rest of us. In this case, Zohran, this is entirely above your pay grade. And with people like Zohran getting elected, plus many countries across the Western world rolling out laws to stifle speech, expressing our thoughts about serious issues is now getting harder. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. What we're seeing in Venezuela isn't an isolated blip or random social media freakout. It's a symptom of something deeper and honestly quite consistent. The same movement that has spent years defining itself as the moral conscience of the world, the self-appointed defenders of the oppressed, now finds itself cheering for one of the most violent authoritarian narco regimes on the planet. That's not an accident. That's not a miscommunication. That's the logical conclusion of what happens when anti-Trumpism becomes anti-Westernism, and anti-Westernism becomes the primary, if not sole lens through which every global event is interpreted. And what makes this reaction to Venezuela particularly strange is that, unlike in many other cases, the country actually did try to resolve this through formal political processes. There were elections, the opposition participated, international observers were present, and when it became clear that Maduro no longer had anything resembling a legitimate mandate, he simply refused to leave. The very idea of democratic transfer of power was quietly abandoned once it stopped producing the desired outcome. So when these lefties suddenly insist that Venezuela should have handled this democratically, what they're really saying is that Venezuelans should have accepted the dictatorship politely because the mechanism that was supposed to allow for peaceful change was no longer allowed to function. At the same time, the country was collapsing in ways that were impossible to ignore. Hyperinflation wiped out savings, shortages became chronic, hospitals struggled to function, and for many people, everyday life became a question of basic survival rather than political ideology. People were starving to the point zoo animals became fair game. The scale of the collapse is reflected in the fact that roughly 8 million Venezuelans eventually left the country, not because they wanted a better job abroad, but because remaining had become untenable. This is what gets lost when people talk about Venezuela as if it were just another abstract case study in international law or geopolitical norms. For the people living there, it wasn't abstract at all. In Venezuela's case, the process was tried. It did not fail because people rejected it, it failed because it was overridden. To add to this, critics of the United States and in the past few years, Israel, often describe themselves as opposing imperialism. They say they stand against economic exploitation, military intervention, and Western domination. But here's the remarkable part, and this is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. When the target of that criticism isn't a Western power, but an anti-Western dictator, suddenly all those righteous claims about defending the oppressed seem to evaporate. In fact, they reverse. The narrative flips so completely that the authoritarian regime becomes the victim, and the ideas that these people claim to oppose, militarism, foreign intervention, geopolitical dominance, they all get stripped of moral meaning whenever the wrong actors are involved. That's how you end up with people online not just defending Maduro, but becoming angry at its capture, because he is, for them, symbolically on the same side as their criticism of the West. He is anti-US, he is pro-Palestine, and those two qualities alone seem to outweigh anything else about what he has done to the Venezuelan people. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans have suffered under hyperinflation, shortages, political repression, and state corruption. Millions have fled the country, and yet, in the eyes of this crowd, none of that matters. What matters is geopolitical alignment against the West. And unfortunately, once again, I have to bring up Bush-Shea, our favorite pan-Islamist who also tweets about said ideas from the safety of a flat in London. Post the US operation, she's openly calling for Iran to go ahead and get nukes. Now, why might that be? You and I both know why. The standard anti-imperialist wants mass annihilation of the West and their allies if even remotely possible. A great case for denaturalization and immediate deportation, some might say. And if you needed any more proof of how warped this worldview has become, look at who's condemning the US operation. Russia, China, Iran. The coalition of states whose own human rights records are abysmal is united in denouncing Maduro's removal, and some in the West cheer that condemnation as if it were a moral badge. That says everything you need to know about their priorities. What's striking about the US operation itself is how surgical it was. No civilian casualties, no open invasion, no prolonged conflict, a precise strike executed quickly. Yet even that didn't shield it from denunciation from voices that previously insisted the only acceptable form of military action was surgical, limited, and careful. Remember when people like Dave Smith complained endlessly that Israel couldn't respond with force unless it was surgical and didn't harm civilians? And then when Israel did conduct a targeted strike against Hezbollah using pager signals, they still complained. That pattern is consistent. Not because they oppose violence or bloodshed, but because their outrage is never actually tied to those things. It's tied to who the actor is. You simply cannot win with these people because it's not about principles. It's about a tribal narrative. If the enemy of your enemy is an authoritarian narco-trafficker or an Islamic regime, they become in that worldview the lesser evil and even heroes of resistance. And if a Western power does something that doesn't even cross ethical lines, you attack it anyway. Because the real point has never been oppression, it has been opposing the West. And that's why when ordinary Venezuelans celebrate freedom from tyranny, while leftists online mourn and cheer for the tyrant, it isn't only strange, it's consistent with a moral framework that isn't moral at all. It's a worldview that substitutes tribal alignment for universal values.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on.